Day is a whirlwind with President Trump and his cabinet. We've got stuff going on at the Panama Canal, Greenland, Russia, Ukraine, Mexico, Canada. My goodness, so much. To help me go through these big stories, I have retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Colonel Davis, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's always, I like getting some military insight on these big stories. Before I ask this question, did you support U.S. military being on the U.S.-Mexico border? Because I know Scott Ritter was against it. Colonel Douglas McGregor was for it, and former CIA Larry Johnson was also for it. Where did you stand on using the military?
If it's done well and if it's cost effective, I'm for it if it secures the border. I think that we have to do whatever's necessary to make sure that only the people that our laws legally allow into the country are able to get there. And if we have to use the military to do that, I've been for it.
Okay, great. Right now, there's been about 1,500 people moved there. There's talks of having upwards of 10,000. President Trump has announced that he has communicated successfully with the new president of Mexico, and she has agreed to put 10,000 Mexican military men and women on the border in order to shut it down. This has bought them an additional 30 days before the tariffs go into effect on Mexico. What do you think of that? Is that going to slow things down with military being on the Mexico side of the problem?
Yeah, this has been done before, and I can't remember what year it is right off the top of my head, but the Mexicans did put military on their side of the border during a period of crisis in the past, and it did appear to have some success because, look, you can't get people to cross into the United States if they can't get to the Rio Grande or the border in several other places. So there is some utility in doing that, and if it can be done cooperatively between Mexico and the United States, because what we don't want to have to do is just say, we're going to cover the entire, I think it's like 2,000 miles or something like that border. And believe me, even 10,000 troops aren't going to be a fraction of what you would need if you actually were going to use that to secure the border. Obviously, we have the Border Patrol, and that's supposed to be their job. You also have state and local law enforcement in each of the border states that are supposed to also help that. If the U.S. military can augment that, that would be helpful. But that's also, I'm not sure you can sustain that indefinitely, because you have an issue of training, you have an issue of troops and the money that would cause, because you'd have to house them, and all that. You can't just throw a bunch of tents up forever. So there's a whole lot that goes into that. If you can get the Mexican on their side to maybe even cooperatively, like saying, all right, well, in this section here, the Mexicans are going to cover the Mexican side of the border, and normal border patrol in the U.S. on this side will do, but in this area they can't, so we'll put our troops on this side, et cetera. If you can work together cooperatively for it's a win-win, then that's something that could be possible. But everything depends on the details, so I'd like to see the plans once they have them announced.
Okay. I have to imagine, just from the limited knowledge that I have, that the president of Mexico weighed out, okay, the cost of 10,000 men and women on our side compared to the money it would cost to have these tariffs hit was probably cheaper to just go ahead and protect the U.S. border on their side.
I mean, that's certainly what the evidence certainly would indicate. I get a little bit uncomfortable if that's the way we're just conducting foreign policy, basically by bullying. We're going to slap these big tariffs on you if you don't do what we want you to do. I think that there are more effective ways to do that, and that's a stopgap measure that's worked for now. But that's the Mexican government is not exactly swimming in cash, so it's going to be a cost to have to deploy on their side. The whole issue, the same thing we would have on our side, is to how are they going to fund that and how are they going to sustain it over time? How long will it last? Those are questions that haven't been answered yet, and so that matters. If we can find win-win solutions that are genuinely cooperative so that both sides benefit from it, then, that's something that can be sustained and can generate goodwill. What you don't want is where, Mexico has to grit its teeth and is going to do what we want, because then historically and just human nature, they'll probably do the least possible just to placate the Trump administration, but they won't do anything more. And it's always better if you can, induce them to find some way that they can benefit from, keeping their border secure as well. And there's many ways you can do that financially, economically, trade issues, et cetera, on a positive front. And I'd like to see them. I hope they go down that path. But so far, we only have this one exchange that you just described there. And we don't know how it's going to work out or be paid for on either side of the border.
Okay. Hopefully more details will come out. I'm reading right now that Border Czar Tom Homan and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth are down on the border now. They will be meeting at one of the military bases in order to iron out the details on troop rotation, housing, food, all of those things that you mentioned. So we don't have all those details now, but we do have at least the detail that those two men are down meeting with leadership in the state of Texas.
And listen, I'm all for it. I think it's long overdue that we should have been secured the border. I mean, what country doesn't secure its own borders? And I've been puzzled by why anyone in a position of authority would be reticent and resist actually securing the border. I mean, we know for sure, we've got documented evidence that there's undocumented, obviously evidence that there is probably millions of people in this country that we didn't authorize to come in. We don't even know who many of them are. We know that some of that we detain, and they have some level of knowledge on that. But I mean, you got to ask how many are getting across and no one even knows about. There's certainly plenty on that, and that's never a good thing. So I think it's good that they're going to secure the border, but like everything, it depends on how you do it. There's an effective and a not so effective way, and again, though, it's got to be sustained over time. So I want to see a long-term plan.
Yeah. I do think, though, in its simplest form, it humiliates Biden and exposes him as a liar and someone who knowingly allowed an invasion of the United States of America. Because look at what Trump has been able to do in 15 days that Biden said he couldn't do in almost 1,200 days. I just think, the difference in perception, the use of the presidential office. And from what I'm reading, crossings are down by 90%. So there's obviously something going on. Let me switch gears with you. What were your thoughts initially, and what are your thoughts now on this Black Hawk military helicopter that crashed directly into a commercial flight?
Yeah, I mean, just the first was just the obvious human tragedy of it. I mean, I've flown in and out of that airport scores of times. I've been on that runway, runway 33. I've driven past that bridge where a lot of the debris fell near, and I've seen helicopters flying all the time. I think I saw that from it was 2019 to 2024, something like that. 88,000 helicopter flights had gone in within 30 miles of the DMV. You always hear helicopters buzzing, even over here where I live, about 20 miles or so away. So I was just struck by the fact that it hadn't happened before, that there hadn't been any accidents in since like the early 80s or something like that in the DCA, the airport here. So, it's good that they had, that long, but it's just horrific, and especially when you see all the stories of, not just the military pilots, but also the airplane pilots and the people that were, destroyed. It just breaks my heart, frankly. And in terms of the causes of the accident or whatever, obviously we're all waiting to see what's on the black box so that you can get the details of exactly what altitude, the aircraft was when it happened. And I think they can figure out what the altitude is of the helicopter. It's puzzling in that, you have these transmissions, radio transmissions, where the helicopter pilot said that they see the American Airlines flight, they're aware of it. And then all of a sudden you see some of these, especially some of the later videos to come out. It is, stark, so clear that they fly straight into the path of that airplane. It's hard to see on those videos, especially some I saw on CNN a couple of days ago. It from the perspective of the camera, it looks like the plane's just sitting still and the helicopter flies into it. But of course, they're both coming at rapid rates of speed and they meet here. The chances of that happening are incredibly remote. It's so difficult if you were trying to actually fly one into another, two moving aircrafts in the dark at very different speeds. And so it just shows how tragic this was that it happened. And I bet we'll find out once they get all this stuff done that there was one of three things. Either the helicopter pilot wasn't at the altitude it thought it was, the airplane wasn't at the altitude that it thought it was, or that the air traffic control told somebody to do something that they weren't supposed to. And I haven't seen enough information out to conclusively say it, but basically I think it's going to be a human error on one or possibly even both of those three areas.
Yeah, I agree. I read all the conspiracy online that, there was an important Russian on the airplane, or that this helicopter was hijacked and remote flown into. There's so much stuff pops up. My guess is when we finally get the details, we're going to find out it was just human error flying at night.
I'll tell you though, the UH-60 doesn't have the capacity for remote piloting. I think airlines, they do have some capacity for that if they're outfitted correctly, but the UH-60 Black Hawk does not. So it has to be manually flown. So that's going to put a crimp in that one. But I will just kind of say that, listen, part of the reasons why these conspiracy theories fly around so much is because so many things in the past have been proven that the government was lying to us, and that the trust in the government is justifiably low because they tell us stories all the time and things that, we would never believe the government has actually authorized and done in the past. And sometimes they come to light, and, that's part of the fallout of that. And then sometimes when something is just a genuine accident and they didn't do anything, there's suspicion because of so many things in the past have been true. And that's just kind of an aside, but that's something that annoys me.
Yeah. This was a big story in the last 24 hours. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine was doing an interview in which he said, the United States government claims that they've sent us $200 billion, but our records only show $77 billion. We don't know. We can't account for over $100 billion. Where do you think that money's gone? Is he thinking that should have all been cash, and America's thinking it went to the military industrial complex to make them new weapons? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny because this is actually an expansion of something he said maybe a week before this, where he said, in fact, it was with Lex Friedman. You may have seen that interview that he did. In the course of that very long interview, he said, listen, we've gotten, I think he used the same figure, 177 billion. At that time, he didn't say 100 billion was misallocated. He just said, we haven't gotten a whole lot of that. And he gave one example. He said, we have a fleet of our own transport aircraft where we can move stuff back and forth between Washington and Kiev. But the United States wouldn't allow us to do that. They said, no, we're going to contract for different organizations to do it, so that a lot of that money then would have to be spent or allocated towards that. So he used that as one example, that money that was allocated to Ukraine war actually went to fund the American carriers who were ever ended up having that contract. And that's one of many such examples, to where you may remember also earlier in the war, one that really stands out to me was, let's see, Senate Majority Leader, what's his name? The Republican.
Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell.
Okay.
Mitch McConnell bragged on the Senate floor that, hey, we need to give all of this money to Ukraine because most of it stays right here in the good old US of A, goes into making all these weapons and jobs everywhere. It's so good for us. Lindsey Graham has been bragging about all this kind of stuff. Really, everybody, both parties, senior leaders, keep telling. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, big proponent of this, said yes, most of this money stays in America. So it's been openly discussed where a lot of this money doesn't go, and that's into Ukraine, and it does go into having contracts for the United States, et cetera. Now, he may not know where 100 million is, but I bet there's a pretty good chance that the State Department and the Department of Defense people know where that money went. And I'm all for a big audit because, Zelensky opened up that box. Great. Let's go inside of it and let's cast a light inside there and find out where that money did go. Because if it's going to just line people's pockets, or if it turns out that actually a boatload of this money, cash, did go to Ukraine, where did that end up and whose pockets did that fall into? So, when you're talking about when Zelensky is talking about he wants more money, and when earlier this afternoon, just a couple hours ago, you had Keir Starmer talking about how they're going to give more to Ukraine in weapons, ammunition, and money in 2025 than they've given up to this point in the war. That's astonishing that you would say that at this point. But nevertheless, that's what they're saying. Where's that money going and who's accounting for it? Because look, Ukraine before the war was designated as the most corrupt nation in all of Europe. Now, how much you want to guess that it's any better now when there's no controls? There's nobody there to say where the money's going, or that it's gotten radically worse. I think human nature where that's going to go. So before we give one more dollar of American money, we need to see where the last dollars went, first of all, and publish it. If it turns out that it's been pocketed by different people, then we need to know about that, and people need to be held accountable.
I agree. And, over the weekend, Elon Musk and his team, they've been sleeping in different government buildings. They finally got access to the U.S. Treasury database, and they're seeing now where all of these payments are going. And he said, I'm not asking anyone where the money went because nobody wants to tell us. I'm just going to follow every single transaction and where that transaction went and where that transaction went. And we're going to have a report to the American people on where their money has been spent. And he's saying already, like 24 hours in, it does not look good. They've been sending money to terrorists. They've been approving money from foreign nations. Basically, he said, anyone that has requested money from the Treasury, they immediately acknowledged that and released that money. And then they wonder why Janet Yellen's saying, we're broke. We have no money. We're running out of money. I mean, the American cookie jar is being raided like crazy. So hopefully they can clean that up. Now, a story broke while you were doing your own show. So you may or may not know about this, but President Trump is saying, if we're going to continue to work with Ukraine, I want to end this war, but America is owed the rare earth minerals of Ukraine. What are your thoughts on him wanting those?
Well, that is news to me. I had not heard that portion of it. I just heard him saying actually earlier today that he wanted the war over with as quickly as possible because it was a ridiculous war or a stupid war, something to that effect. And of course, I cheered that on. I didn't hear him comment about the rare earth materials. You got to wonder, who's also been talking about rare earth materials? Oh, Lindsey Graham has been screaming about that for months now. That he wants to get his hands on that. And I bet he's been trying to convince Trump that's the right thing. Here's the problem. Well, there's a couple of problems. First of all, just geography. Right now, Russia is in control of most of the area where those rare earths are. So they're already out of our reach, that we're not going to have them. If we don't reach a negotiated settlement really fast, Russia's going to keep moving to the east, to the west, and they're going to take even more of those territories. So if you want to have any possibility of, having business deals with that, then you need to get this war over with like right now, because otherwise they're all going to be on Russia's side. And it's going to be going to Russia and China and whoever they decide to do business with. But the last issue I'd say on that is that we need to all be pretty careful that we understand that's Ukraine's possessions here. That is their future. That's their natural resources that their country's going to need. So if anybody's under the confusion that we're going to go in and like get it or take it, it's not ours to get or take. It belongs to Ukraine. If we're helping Ukraine or we want to try to help them control any portion of their land right now, they're going to need desperately to have that to do business with under their control so that they can pay for their reconstruction. Otherwise, you're going to have U.S. business elites go in there and try to take control of it. And then the Ukraine government's going to need loans and other money from Western Europe and try to get it from the U.S. to pay for, and we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in reconstruction aid that's going to be necessary there. And if they're not willing to do that, then don't take their stuff. So I hope that's not the plan.
Well, I know Trump was famous during the Middle East war for saying, we need to get out of here, but if not, at least take over their oil fields. I think he felt like if America was giving something, they should get something back. And if we've given $200 billion and they have no way of repaying it, he may be seeing these rare earth minerals as the only way that Ukraine can make good on the money that was given to them from American taxpayers. I don't know.
But you can't, and we have to be careful about this too. You can't go back after the fact and say that this money we gave you, actually it was a loan, unless it was specifically characterized as a loan. And I know there was some talk going forward, especially if Harris had won, that they were going to, the tranches were going to be loans. But if you just gave it to them and said, this is, because you're being attacked or whatever, now you can't come and say, yeah, about that money, there was some strings attached to it. I don't know if you knew, we're going to put some conditions on it now, and that means you're going to pay us back. I don't think that's how it's supposed to work. It doesn't work in the legal ways on that anyway. And frankly, we don't want to be put in a position because that has the impression that you're basically like a loan shark, and you're out to exploit somebody who's in a weakened position that's supposed to be on your side. It's not a good look, and it doesn't help us, not just with our image, but it also could harm us going forward when other people may want to do business with us if they see that that's what we will do when someone's down on their luck. So I hope we wouldn't do that. If we want to take advantage of that, then it needs to be done legally, like we do when we get stuff from any other country where we just do business. And hopefully that's what Trump has in mind.
Well, that's kind of the impression I got. And again, this is a story that just broke on you and me, so we don't have all of the details. But from the little that I read, it made it sound like if America is going to continue to help Ukraine, then there needs to be negotiating. And if you don't have money, what do you have? Rare earth minerals. Trump also seems to really want Greenland for their rare earth minerals. And I just have to wonder, Colonel, if that has to do with China shutting down the export of rare earth minerals to the United States. And so behind the scenes, they're saying, wait a minute, if we can't get them from China, we need to start getting them from other countries or other allies. I don't know. Again, this is a new
I mean, how could it not be part of the deal? I mean, why all of a sudden is it an imperative, to do something with Greenland? Although Greenland, the number of rare earths isn't that high. I've seen 40-50 billion of potential rare earths. I think it's like the 8th largest in the world, which is not as great as it sounds, because the ones at the top of the list are percentage-wise massive proportions of it. But we also have to look at, all right, why has China shut down a lot of its rare earth sent it to the United States? And is there anything we can do diplomatically to get that spigot back open again so that we can do business there, et cetera? Or if you can find alternatives in Greenland, then again, let's just work within the system that we have. Denmark is in control of it. The Greenland people have a say. If you want to do business with them, we can do that. But, I think it's going down a dark path if we start taking things.
Yeah. President Trump didn't give a lot of details, but he said the ending of the Russia-Ukraine war is making a lot of traction behind the scenes. Do you have any details on that? And do you believe that Vladimir Putin is genuine about wanting to end the war?
The second part first. 100% Vladimir Putin wants to end the war, and he would absolutely prefer to do it via negotiated settlement, because he has incentive to get the war over so that they can end the loss of their troops and their bloodshed. And they can, instead of putting a lot of their economic energy and dependent or power onto military means, they can start doing it on things that can be sustained over long term. They can be doing more business, which is what they want to do, because this war is clearly a temporary situation, which they know they're not going to make it a permanent situation. But right now they're diverting a lot of their industrial capacity towards things that have only a near-term outgoing capacity. They create all this ammunition, weapons, tanks, airplanes, missiles, all that. That doesn't generate any cash. That just creates outgoing missiles, bombs and that kind of thing. So they would much rather divert their attention and energy to making something that creates an economic return on investment. So the sooner they can get the war over with, the sooner they can divert some of their industrial capacity back to the long-term solution of making money. However, that comes at a significant caveat that national security is the top priority, even above economic prosperity for the Russian side. And the reason they went to war in the first place was because the West said that we're going to put Ukraine in NATO. And they said, no, that's not going to happen. We'll go to war to prevent that. So nobody needs to be under any illusions that whatever comes out of this, there will be no NATO for it, or Russia will simply keep fighting until they conquer Ukraine. And even if it took another year plus, they can do it. They have the capacity industrially, they have the manpower, and they could even, they've never even mobilized other than that first tranche in 2022. And if it ever got to it, if they ever started running low on troops, so like if they didn't have enough, they could simply mobilize just like Ukraine did and to get into the forced mobilization. So, and there's no evidence that they're going to need to do that because they can still recruit enough people that that more than offsets loss. I think the latest plausible figure I've seen is about 1.25 million active troops that Russia has at the moment, because they've lost, whatever the number is, probably 100,000 dead, 250,000 seriously wounded, which is insane numbers, a whole lot less than what is on the Ukraine side, but it's still substantial. But they have the manpower to offset those losses, and they're continuing to grow. They're like 300,000 or 400,000 larger now than they were when they invaded, and the overall quality of their force is higher. So if the West, and that means President Trump primarily, and Zelensky is honestly not really a player in this, I'm just being honest. If Trump doesn't make a deal because he doesn't like the terms, then Putin will simply keep fighting because he doesn't have to make a deal. Ukraine has to make a deal if they want to survive as a nation. Russia doesn't. And so that is leverage that Trump simply doesn't have. It doesn't matter how good of a deal maker he is. If he doesn't have sufficient leverage in his hand to compel the other side to make a deal to his liking, they just won't make the deal. But Trump does want it done. He wants it off the table because he has a domestic agenda that he wants to go to, and he doesn't need this distraction. He doesn't need any more money going in there, and he doesn't want to just abandon Ukraine so that they suffer a military loss, because then that will damage his reputation and a bunch of other stuff. So I think it's in his interest, Trump's, to make a negotiated deal, but everybody needs to understand it's going to be ugly for Ukraine in the best of circumstances. Or like I said, Russia will just keep fighting until it takes what it wants.
In an interview with President Putin, looked like he was maybe in the back of a limo or a nice.
Yeah, I saw that.
Like that.
Interesting.
He said that he didn't think Zelensky had the authority to even end the war. Is that because Zelensky shut down their democratic elections and put himself back in office? Is that because he believes that NATO has the power versus Ukraine? Why might he have said?
It's a combination of two things. One is that in 2024, and I forget the month, it may have been May of 2024, his term of service expired. And according to the Constitution, I think their presidential term is 5 years instead of 4. Obviously, there had to be an election, and there had to be a new president. But Zelensky said, nope, martial law, and we're not going to have an election during a time of war. So he just didn't have it and just said, I'm still the president, and I'm going to be the president however long this takes. And you see that Putin is saying, that's not a democratic country. That's not a democratic way of life. You have to have an election or you don't have a legitimate leader. And that's what he said they have right now. And ironically, Putin also came up for election in 2024 and he held the election. And so now he's, viewed as the legitimate leader because he stood for and won an election. At the same time, Zelensky said he can't, even though it was during the same war. You have the United States during our Civil War. Abraham Lincoln stood for re-election during the war. So we have some precedents with that too. And it's just disappointing that we turned a blind eye and just said, oh yeah, sure, Zelensky doesn't have to do anything. Because we want to say how democratic they are. And yet there's so many undemocratic things that the Zelensky regime has done, and staying in his power is one of them. So Putin's position is we can negotiate with Zelensky himself, and we can come to terms, but we're not going to sign any deal with him because he's not the legitimate president, because otherwise, they can later say, well, he wasn't legally the president anyway, so now we don't have to abide by this. And he said, we're not going to do that. So either they're suggesting in other interviews, either they said there needs to be an election, and then whoever is the legally elected person, that's who we'll make a deal with. Or apparently there's something within the Constitution that some members of the Rada, their parliament, could also be effectively the persons that sign any kind of a document. So he's just saying that he'll talk to Zelensky. They can even negotiate, but he won't sign anything with Zelensky. He'll have to be somebody else.
Final question. I appreciate you coming on, Colonel. If President Trump hasn't set a date to speak with Putin, but says behind the scenes there's good things happening and there's traction, would that be Marco Rubio or General Kellogg, or who do you think is getting traction and reporting back to Trump that it's good traction?
Probably there's a number of people, but actually, even though Trump designated Keith Kellogg months ago that he was going to be his designated war czar or whatever between Russia and Ukraine, he was only formally signed that today. He actually signed it and said, yes, we're moving. We've been making lots of progress or so. My expectation is that probably Kellogg has been talking to some people behind the scenes. It would certainly have to include Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I mean, I can't imagine that he would not be, intimately involved. So I'm sure he is. Then there's probably some other, high-level staffers that are close to Trump that are probably doing a lot of that as well. And now that Kellogg has been officially designated as the envoy to that war, I think now then the door is open for there to be an official meeting. And whether I would wager that probably he would first go to Kiev, if nothing else, just for the viewpoints of it and the images. But then shortly thereafter, or maybe even in the same trip, then he would go to Moscow. My guess is he would talk to Sergei Lavrov. No matter who the U.S. sends, it's going to have to go through Lavrov because he's been Putin's foreign minister for 20-something years, and he's definitely not going to be sidelined. So nobody else has got the heft to do that. So it's probably going to be Lavrov, and I'm guessing behind the scenes they have been talking to him. And I wouldn't expect Trump and Putin to get together until their subordinates had come to, at least the loose out terms of a goal, because Trump had some bad experience with that with Kim Jong-un in 2018, for example, when they thought they were working on a deal. They didn't have it knocked out before he got there. And then turned out he didn't like it. And that really sank the rest of the negotiations for the remainder of his term. And I think that this time he'll want to make sure that there's something relatively close to agree to, that his presence there with Putin can maybe knock out the final pieces that they can agree to. So I think that's what we'll see.
Okay. Well, a lot of domestic and foreign fires to put out after the Biden administration. I'm encouraged by what Trump and his team are doing. I know that it's an uphill battle to get it all cleaned up. Colonel Davis, if people want to follow you online, what's the best place for me to push them towards?
You can go to one of two places, either to you should go to YouTube and then type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and they'll find us right there. It should go straight to us. Or nearly anywhere you get podcasts, same thing. Just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you'll find us there on that venue.
Okay. I will put direct links to that down below. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for your service to our country. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks a lot.